Next week, October 4th, we'll be back in the same room to hear Robert Casely, Lojo Simon, and Marco De Asse speak about art and collaboration. Art about art, collaboration and expression of self and other in creating new work for theater. That's in this room.
And that's the director and playwright for the play that is opening this week, The Adoration of Dora. I encourage you to think about attending. So that's the playwright and the director and an art historian about that time period. So it should be most intriguing.
And a great segue to introduce Professor Rodney Fry, who will introduce
someone who needs no introduction, but will get introduced. Someone whose role gets reversed today for the first time in all of the Malcolm Renfrew interdisciplinary colloquiums. You've always been up here introducing folks. Today, you're going to be solo in the spotlight. This is wonderful. I'm Rodney Fry, honored to be the College of Letters, Arts, and Social Sciences Distinguished Humanities Professor, supported by an endowment within our college, and so much thanks to Dean Catherine Aiken for making this possible. I've been asked to put together a theme, and we have a theme that has a handout of over 30 presentations yet to come. So if you don't know about the other presentations, be sure to pick up a handout over here on the table. It's a website, it's even on Facebook now. Anyway, I've been asking a lot of faculty and graduate students, over 50 now, including Michael, from your perspective, what's the relationship between the unique on one hand and the universal, that interplay between our diversity and what we share in common? And if that resonates with you, what sort of implications might there be for communications, for collaboration, for creativity, and for building community? This afternoon we'll hear Michael O'Rourke's response to that question. His talk is entitled Better Living Through Philosophy, Ways of Knowing and the Search for Common Ground. Michael, as you know, is a professor in the philosophy department, also faculty with regard with neurosciences and environmental sciences here at the university, has extensive research interests and publications in the area of philosophical communication and linguistics, epistemological integration, interdisciplinary theory, and robotic agent design. Reflective of these interests, and very successful in his publication record and teaching includes such things as Michael as a PI for a National Science Foundation funded project entitled Improving Communications Cross-Disciplinary Collaboration. He also serves as co-director of the Inland Northwest Philosophy Conference, which is sponsored each year by University of Idaho and Washington State University, held that position since 1998. Since 2000, Michael has served as a co-editor of the Topics in Contemporary Philosophy, published out of MIT. Michael is also, and I might mention some of these things today, I'm not sure, but a co-founder and a team member of Toolbox, a philosophical approach to improving cross-disciplinary communication. And along with Dan Buckvich and Rick Fehrenbacher, co-founders of this colloquium, Dan and Michael have continued organizing this wonderful format for us over so many years, and thank you for that. So let me please welcome to all of us, Michael O'Rourke.
Thank you, sir. This is the first time I've given a solo talk in the series in the 11 years of its history. And I'm pretty nervous, actually. I'm up here introducing people for typically at the beginning of each of the sessions, but this is a little bit of a different game. I have had the opportunity over the years to get to know Rodney pretty well and to collaborate with him in the classroom. I teach a theory of knowledge course that is upper level undergraduate and lower level graduate student course. And Rodney has helped me the last couple of times when I've taught that. He's brought to bear an indigenous perspective and an appreciation for ways of knowing that has really enriched and invigorated the course as I teach it. And when I was given the opportunity to give a presentation in his series, in this Colloquium series, I jumped at the chance and wanted to make sure that my remarks were related not only to the topic of the series as a whole and the keynote address his wonderful keynote address that he delivered a few weeks ago, but also to the things I've learned from him over the years about epistemological matters and other matters related to knowledge and communication. So I am a philosopher, and to some extent this talk is going to be a talk about, it's going to be my own story as a philosopher. It's also, though, intended to be a story about the power of philosophy as a practice. I tend, when given the opportunity to talk about philosophy, to be something of a cheerleader for my discipline. So you can think of this as kind of a 30-minute cheer, if you want. All right, so this is the title of the talk, and I really mean that, and even though you might wonder how I mean that. Here is an outline. I'll start by just splashing up some of the elements of the talk to kind of put them out there. You can think about them a little bit if you'd like. The problem that I'll address today is the problem of intercultural misunderstanding. So the challenge of bringing cultures together who may not have the same values, who may not experience or appreciate the world in the same way. The goal is better living in the context of diversity, especially cultural diversity. And the method that I'll employ in my talk and framing what I have to say is philosophical reflection. There is a bit of conceptual background, some preparatory work that I think I need to do before I talk about the steps toward a solution. The concepts that are especially important are ways of knowing, common ground, and integration or synthesis. I'll conclude with a discussion of the Toolbox project, which, as Rodney indicated, is a project that I direct, a project that I've been very, very pleased to be a part of from the beginning with Sanford Eigenbrod and J.D. Wolforst on this campus. It's a project that focuses on communication across disciplines and across professions. And I'll talk a little bit about what the context of that project is and what the specific problem is that we try to address in it, and spend a little time describing the philosophical response that we've come up with to that particular challenge. And then I'll conclude by waxing metaphorical a bit. So here are the elements in no particular order. The size does sort of indicate what I hope to be the importance of the elements in the context of the talk. I really am interested in this. Whether I have anything interesting to say about it, I'll leave that to you to decide, but I don't want to lose sight of the content of Rodney's keynote address, which had a big impact on me and had, I think, a very big influence on this particular talk. And among other things, ways of knowing philosophy, the Toolbox project will all figure centrally into the comments I have to make today. So, the problem. Let's start with cultural interaction. And this is going to be very simplistic, and I apologize for that. I'd be happy to try to provide a more detailed characterization of this in discussion. But we can think of cultures as socially distributed sets of beliefs, values, and experiences. Right? So you can see cultures as exhibited by peoples in different regional and global locations as being different in part because of what they value, what they believe, and how they've been raised, the types of individual and social experiences that define their identities. You can also see cultures, so understood, represented in institutions. And especially, I think, or perhaps maybe not especially, but certainly in universities. So there are cultures of teaching, administration, and research. There are also cultures exhibited by the disciplines that are housed in the various departments on our campus. Right? A given discipline is a part of the life of a teacher or a researcher because they have been exposed to canonical beliefs, core beliefs that define the range of interests that occupy the time and attention of representatives of those disciplines. There are values concerning what types of knowledge are more important than other types of knowledge. And then there are also experiences. Graduate school, for instance, is a sort of crucible experience for many of us who've become researchers and teachers at university, right? It's a crucible experience designed to help you kind of form or crystallize some of the expertise that's hopefully going to be what guides you through your career. Cultures support different views of the world. And here's a toy example, right? Is it a duck? Is it a rabbit? Perhaps it's a duck rabbit. But it's a toy example, I admit. But it's a different, you think about views of the world, right? You can see things differently. Ambiguous figures like the duck rabbit or the martini bikini, or there are a whole bunch of these, demonstrate in a very simple, focused way the fact that you can look at something and see something very different from what somebody else sees. In some cases, not this one. In other cases of ambiguous figures, sometimes it can be really difficult to see it the other way, right? You have to have this sort of dramatic kind of conversion almost to see it the other way. Here's a slightly more full-blooded example of this, right? I mean, looking down the aisle at a well-stocked Western grocery store, this means different things to different people, and people from other cultures look at that and they see something very different than what you and I see. I mean, you and I look at that and we wonder, is the cranberry juice on sale, right? Or where's the cereal aisle again? I mean, or whatever. I mean, these are the kinds of things that pop into our heads, but people from other cultures will look at that and see something quite different. Now, the worldviews that are kind of defining characteristic or defining part of life in a culture frame how we experience the world, they frame how we interact with one another, and they also frame what we take ourselves to know about ourselves as individuals and about the world that we live in. Examples of kind of broad worldviews that were described by Rodney in his keynote address were head knowledge and heart knowledge. Right? Head knowledge being associated with a kind of reductivist, a materialist, sort of scientific way of engaging with the world, right? Where distinctions and rational methodologies were especially important, versus heart knowledge, which places more of an emphasis on kinship and on spirituality, on a kind of holism and an emphasis on emergence over reductionism. These, again, are very broad. These are just terms for very broad types of orientations that we might take to the world. And it's not clear that it's very easy to sort of snap back and forth between these. We kind of might very well be kind of locked into one of these. One of the virtues, I think, of the series of presentations that Rodney's put together is it gives us an opportunity to think about how one might toggle back and forth between different worldviews of this type. When you bring cultures together, as invariably happens, their different worldviews can sometimes blend into a wonderful thing. They can be a really educational, inspirational opportunity, but it can also, of course, as we all know, produce a problematic diversity, a kind of diversity is cacophony or divisiveness. Right? Multicultural misunderstanding or intercultural misunderstanding is responsible for all sorts of bloodshed, wars. I mean, I'm not saying anything you guys don't already know. Life can be harder when some sort of unity is not achieved amidst the diversity. This is the broad problem that I'm hoping to say some small thing about. Sort of in the spirit of academic research, I'm going to give you this really big problem that everybody cares about and then wind up saying something really small about it. But hopefully it'll still be interesting. the goal. So I've set the bar low. Right? All I want to do is improve life by finding unity in the diversity. So just, okay. Now, Rodney in his talk and also on the website and just now talked about the unique and the universal, sort of the interplay of the unique and the universal. And I think that's a very interesting couple of concepts to put into to discourse with one another. You can think about, right, looking for your own identity or the identity of your family or your culture or whatever in the universal context we find ourselves. But you can also turn that around. And you can start by presupposing the unique, start by presupposing the fact that we're all different or that cultures are different, and then seek to identify what's universal across those unique examples, right, those unique instances. And that's, I think, what the search for some sort of solution to intercultural misunderstanding is all about, seeking the universal in the unique. This requires identifying common ground on which to stand to bridge the differences. And I think the way that I like to think of unity here, or universality, is not as a type of unison or uniformity, but rather as a kind of harmony, as a way of blending that respects difference as opposed to washing out difference. So, intercultural misunderstanding, try to say something about that addresses, at least, maybe even solves in some small way that problem. And the method that I'm going to deploy for this purpose is philosophy, philosophical methodology. There are lots of methods that one could use. And philosophy might seem like it should be low on the list, on the priority list of methods one might employ for this purpose. As a philosopher, I don't really have many other options, quite frankly. But I actually think that philosophy is a very, very powerful method. It provides a very powerful way of addressing some of the issues that arise when we bring cultures together and they don't blend or mesh effectively. The question, though, that you might have, I think that it should have, is why think philosophy can help and why think of it as at all relevant to better living. The first thing we should do, though, is talk a little bit about what philosophy is. There probably as many different views of philosophy as there are philosophers, and sort of maybe more. But here's one way of thinking about the concept. You can look at its etymology and focus on the Greek word philosophia as the love of wisdom. You can also think about philosophy as being a practice that's pursued by individuals interested in identifying the good life, right? In identifying what it is to live a good life or live in a happy life. Eudaimonia, right? The concept of human flourishing is something that Aristotle focused on in his Ethics as a proper objective for philosophical reflection. Now, the love of wisdom seems associated pretty nicely with reason and theory, pursuit of the good life with action and practice, and together those two, I think, are somewhat evocative of the head knowledge, heart knowledge kind of distinction that we were playing with before. My own view is that philosophy really represents a kind of synthesis of these. That while in our day-to-day work, when we're writing papers and teaching classes, we may focus perhaps more on the wisdom, reason side of things than on the good life side of things. It seems to me that philosophers should attempt as much as possible to provide a unified sort of exposure to or a unified introduction through their work to a synthesized effort, an effort that involves bringing wisdom to bear on human life with a view to improving it. Philosophy, I think, does this, or at least has the power to do this, because it's capable of reframing, reconceiving, and resetting. Philosophy is, at bottom, an abstract discipline. It's a discipline that recommends abstracting away from detail toward commonality. With that, then, I ask us, for the purposes of the talk, to focus on philosophy as an effort to identify the unity in the diversity through abstraction. Now, you don't need to be a card-carrying philosopher to do this. Right? I happen to be a card-carrying philosopher, but you don't have to be. in order to do this. And I think most of us do this. Most of us engage in this kind of work at various points in our life. So, you know, I mean, maybe if you agree with me, then maybe you can kind of see yourself as a fellow traveler here, using philosophy as a way of improving life. The conceptual background, so the three more concepts before I talk about the details of a particular approach to solution. The first, the ways of knowing. Ways of knowing, as I understand it, is an epistemological concept. It's a concept that is at home in the philosophical subdiscipline known as epistemology, which is the study or science of knowledge. It is related to worldviews which figured so centrally into the way I think about cultures. The different ways of engaging the world, of becoming connected to it, of living in it. These are ways of knowing. They're different, in my view, from ways of believing. So there's an important contrast between knowing and believing that suggests there's something more firm or something more stable or something about knowing than about believing. That believing is a little bit less well connected to the lives that we're leading. And so is kind of a normative, maybe, distinction to be made between ways of knowing and ways of believing. Rodney may disagree with that. I'm kind of curious to know if that's acceptable. But I'd like to suggest that if we want to talk about ways of knowing, we want to talk about those ways of engaging with the world that do provide us with stability, that do provide us with balance. There are a diversity of these ways. Head knowledge and heart knowledge, once again, stand as an example of two different ways of knowing, broad categories of such ways. If you focus on head knowledge and think here about science, right, as an example as a sort of the paradigmatic example of a particular head knowledge practice, then concepts such as evidence, justification, and argument are crucial to how that particular way of knowing unfolds, how that particular way of knowing generates understanding. And one can see, if one allows research to be interpreted pretty broadly, one can see this kind of knowledge, the kind of knowledge that's critical to this way of knowing is born in research. Second concept, common ground. Let's think about the metaphor for a moment, right? So ground in common on which we stand together, right? Where our feet are set and there's a mutual stake in the outcome of standing there, right? I mean, you can find yourself in an elevator with three strangers and think of that as common ground, but as soon as the door opens, you leave and that's that, right? So I mean, there's no stake in being together in an elevator, right? That doesn't count as common ground. There's something important about being at that location with those people. Common ground enables participants to see the differences and similarities. So common ground, again, isn't about uniformity or single-mindedness. It isn't about putting people together with a view to blending them and washing out the differences, but rather putting them together in a place where they can observe, appreciate the differences, and work collectively towards similarity. So it's less about the iRobot and more about the marketplace idea, right? That's kind of the images that image is a little bit closer to the mark from my perspective as an instance of common ground. Again, if we look at head knowledge as a particular sort of culture, if you will, common ground has some currency as a concept in that particular domain. Typically, when common ground is cashed out as a concept by those who are engaged in scientific practice, it's cashed out in terms of shared information. So you'll find folks in linguistic semantics and psychology of communication, people like Bob Stalnecker and Herb Clark, for those of you keeping score at home, they use common ground as a notion that accounts for, that provides a kind of, or models a necessary condition for communicative success. In interdisciplinary theory, common ground is used as an epistemic condition on disciplinary synthesis. So the ability to bring disciplines together productively in pursuit of a solution to a particular kind of problem requires the achievement of some kind of interdisciplinary or at least multidisciplinary common ground. Finally, synthesis. So again, The idea behind synthesis here, right? If you think of ways of knowing as being the source of diversity and common ground as being a kind of source of unity, you can see synthesis or sort of integrative processes as being an attempt to achieve a kind of harmony with among the very different ways of knowing that we've talked about. Now, philosophy as abstraction can work to generate synthesis by moving from differences, and in particular, if you think here about disciplinary differences, so think about culture, the disciplines, intellectual disciplines as cultures. Philosophy can work as a way of abstracting from cultural differences exhibited by disciplines to common ground without washing out those disciplines, or without washing out those disciplinary differences. Right, so respect and preserve those differences and aim to produce conceptual harmony. All right, so with that, so problem is intercultural misunderstanding. The goal is to say something about it that replaces the misunderstanding with understanding, and to use philosophy for that purpose. And as I said, I don't have a lot to say that's really interesting about intercultural misunderstanding that really matters to the world at large. My remarks from here on out really focus more specifically on intercultural misunderstanding as it is exhibited by collaborators in cross-disciplinary research projects and also projects of the sort that are often born in university that bring not only researchers together, but also researchers together with managers and policymakers and stakeholders. So people who are interested in taking knowledge that's generated in university and translating it out into the world. Given that that's my focus, head knowledge, you can understand now why I've been spending so much time using head knowledge as my example, because that's really kind of the foundation for much of the work that we've done in the Toolbox project. Today what I'm going to do is focus a little bit on translational research. So this is research that the term translational comes from the health sciences. It's research, again, that focuses on moving information from university or the academy out into the world. So translational health science is health science that focuses on, as they put it, moving results from the bench to the bedside. Right, you might have heard of that expression, but the bench to bedside movement. So taking insights and developments from the laboratory to the clinic more quickly, figuring out how to do that so that patients can profit from the work that biologists and other basic scientists do. But translational research is not limited to health science. It's also exhibited these days by work being done on climate change. Right? There too, we find examples of individuals interested in taking research from the university and pushing it out into the world. So Sanford's USDA NIFA Center, the Regional Approaches to Climate Change Center, focuses exactly on this, taking research from universities like University of Idaho, Washington State, and Oregon State, and moving it out into the farms and ranches and other places where stakeholders can use it to respond successfully to changes in climate and all the implications that those have. This is an intercultural context, home to misunderstanding and miscommunication. I've got examples, but I suspect I don't need to really provide too much argument for this. And the idea is to use philosophy to enable partners in these research efforts to bridge their cultural gaps, finding some unity in their diversity. The context in our problem, right? If you think about, again, the basic concepts that I introduced, ways of knowing, common ground, and synthesis, you can see all of these instantiated by aspects of the collaborations that aim to achieve translational research goals. The partners in these efforts see different worlds, they value different outcomes, they speak different languages. If you've ever tried to talk with somebody from a different college and about a topic of mutual interest, you might walk away from that conversation, frustrating often conversation, thinking that no, in fact, that wasn't a topic of mutual interest. I thought it was, but it turns out that they're talking about something completely different. the problems and projects that bring these people together, bring collaborators together to think about the impacts of climate change on Pacific Northwest agriculture, or to think about how to more quickly move results about pulmonary insult through clinical trials out into the clinics. These problems seem to provide us with common ground, but it's often insufficient common ground. It's often insufficient to enable the participants to figure out how to talk to one another. I mean, when it actually gets down and dirty in the details of the project, you find that you just can't communicate very effectively. And what we've tried to do on the Toolbox project is use philosophical abstraction to enable partners to transcend differences and see the world, and in particular the world of the project through each other's eyes. So our principal problem really then is communication. It's transdisciplinary or interprofessional and cross-disciplinary communication. If you've engaged in projects like this, if you've ever participated in an interdisciplinary project or translational project, you know that they are confronted by many challenges. Logistical challenges, infrastructural, administrative, so on. It's our view that these challenges are at bottom communication challenges, or at least that communication figures importantly into making sense out of how those challenges get in the way of successful research. Examples of ways in which these communication challenges can manifest themselves. You find that you need to sell the science you do to grant agencies, to administrators, to your chair, to stakeholders. You need to establish and manage individual and collective identities within the groups, within the collaborative group. You need to maintain reputation. If reputation is lost, that can really sink a group's battleship. You need to avoid unreasonable disagreement. That seems pretty obvious. But perhaps less obvious is the need to avoid unreasonable agreement. The need to acknowledge the fact that sometimes you may think you're talking about exactly the same thing when in fact you're not. Right? Things might be going forward really effortlessly, but then you realize, oh, we were actually talking past one another. Finally, negotiating research compromises is a very important part of this work, and that's also a communication issue. The Facilitating Interdisciplinary Research volume produced by the National Academies seconds this idea, or maybe firsts it since we came after them. But the idea that at the heart of interdisciplinarity is communication. So a little bit more about our response in the Toolbox project. It focuses on understanding and improving communication about research content within collaborations, right? Whether they're cross-disciplinary collaborations or translational. It grew out of the University of Idaho Integrative Graduate Education and Research Traineeship, or IGRT project that Nilsa Bosque Perez directs. It's a project that began in 2001, has been renewed. That project put collaborators, graduate students together in teams, asked them to prepare dissertations collaboratively. I mean, they each wrote individual dissertations on their disciplines, but they had to co-author chapters and work together toward an interdisciplinary solution. Turns out that's really hard to do. And the students really wanted something to help them. And they approached Sanford, who's a PI on that project, and Sanford asked me to join in, and we taught a seminar that led to the development of the Toolbox approach. And again, the idea there being that you have a bunch of PhD students whose PhD success depends upon working successfully together, and they were struggling. And they wanted to produce some practical product, some product that could be utilized by them in the course of their work to make their lives better. And this is what we came up with. I think it's pretty good. I hope you'll agree. But this is what we've come. It's really a simple idea. Okay, it's a philosophical idea at bottom, but it's a simple philosophical idea. That is that better understanding yields better communication. Now, clearly, that's not always true, right? If you're locked in some sort of adversarial relationship with someone and you come to understand them better, that might not generate better communication. But if you are engaged in a project where you're actually trying to achieve some collective outcome and you come to understand one another better, then chances are that will have a salutary impact on the quality of the communication you engage in as a group. We operationalize the idea through structured dialogue. We believe that structured dialogue can reveal fundamental assumptions that disciplinarians and other professionals engaged in these projects have about the project that they're working on. And we also maintain that this dialogue is more successful, more productive if philosophical. And philosophy does a couple of things here. One thing it does is it provides us with a grip on how to structure the dialogue. So philosophy gives us a sort of systematic way of thinking about what a person's research assumptions are and how that structure of research assumptions is put together. And so we try as best we can to articulate that in what we sort of call the toolbox, and then use that toolbox to guide the dialogue. It also provides that toolbox and the workshop around it, common ground for the discussion. So there are two parts to this. There's the instrument and the workshop. I have examples of some of the instrument language that I'll just sort of, here you go. You can take one and pass it back. The toolbox is a table of philosophical prompts that reveal fundamental assumptions about research and practice. And they're structured into two categories, those that concern what the world must be like that we may investigate it, and what we must be like that we may investigate the world. An example of a prompt would be scientific research must be hypothesis-driven. So you get this toolbox that looks a lot like what you're going to see here in a second. And it has a bunch of these modules in it, and the modules are associated with Likert scales, and there are statements, and you read through the statements, and you react to them. And then as a group, in the workshop session, you talk about those statements for a couple of hours. We audio tape and then transcribe the audio tape, these sessions, and then collect a variety of other data. The project into which the toolbox experience figures as a research project, in addition to being an outreach project. We really are hoping to have a positive effect, a beneficial effect on these collaborations. But at the same time, we're interested in evaluating the nature of this intervention, trying to figure out what kind of impact it has on collaborative science. So let me see if I can connect the dots, right? So intercultural misunderstanding, use philosophy to try to make it better. So what we've done is focus on intercultural misunderstanding exhibited by research collaborations. And we've attempted to use philosophy to help structure a dialogue in which collaborators can come to see the world of, at least the world of their collaborative project, through each other's eyes. I want to end by talking about wheels and bridges and how this might relate to some of the metaphors that Rodney introduced in his keynote address. He said, and this is quoting him, "How can two people so different relate so effortlessly?" It's a great question, and it's a question that when collaborative projects work between representatives of different disciplines is as interesting a question as you're going to find, right? How can you bring two people together and things just work out so well? You don't need philosophical intervention of the toolbox variety to do collaborative science. That's obvious, right? People do it naturally, right? But I kind of think that there's something about the power of philosophy to bring people together that's even responsible in those cases for some of the unity that's achieved by those collaborations within their diversity. I think the Toolbox Project is a story of how philosophy can bridge what divides the spokes, another quote from Rodney's talk. It enables common ground on which to integrate different professional ways of knowing. And as a consequence, we think the results are we're still kind of in the early stage of the results, but the results are certainly auspicious at this point. The result is better living for professionals, at least within the context of those collaborations, and perhaps through the output of their work for others. Now, the goal of the Toolbox Project is not to sort of have everyone at the end sort of lock arms and sing Kumbaya or, we are the world or something. That's not the point. That's not the goal, right? I mean, you bring people from different disciplines and professions together because they're from different disciplines and different professions. They bring different expertise, different perspectives. That's the whole idea. You don't want to lose that. And you have to acknowledge that with that comes tension, with that comes disagreement. But you have to be open to the idea that, that disagreement can produce release through resolution and insight, right? That the goal here should be harmony again, right? Bringing differences together in a way that's positive, right? That resonates in a good way. And to that end, it seems to me it's important to think of negotiable disagreement, maybe not all disagreement, but at least negotiable disagreement, as a kind of achievement, right? As something that's really a good thing, especially for collaborative projects. So, living is hard, at least I think it is. But I do believe it can be improved, and I think philosophy can have something to do with that. We've been helped by lots and lots of folks. I mean, Sanford's every bit as big a part of this as I am, and although I can't say that he'd agree with everything I said today, and then we've had a lot of supporters. We're involved in a number of sort of alphabet soup there of acronyms that represent projects we participate in. And we're an ongoing effort. Thank you.
Questions for Michael?
John.
So have you thought about doing experiments to measure the effect size of toolbox?
The effect size.
Yeah.
So explain that to me.
So you want to measure not whether toolbox works or not. So you have an
Right.
experiment in which toolbox is applied in one case and not applied in another.
Right, yeah. In fact, that we submitted a proposal to the NSF. So this has been funded by National Science Foundation, and the first wave of funding was really for exploratory work, just so we could get out. We've run about 65 of these workshops now around the country in various places, and most of that work was intended to just see what the moving parts were here. I mean, what we could vary and you know, what we could improve. We submitted a proposal to NSF this past February that they passed on. They won't pass on it again, but they passed on it the first time. That was intended to transition the project from being an exploratory one into an experimental one. And the research design that we built into that involved creating a kind of collaborative profile. So use a set of kind of a multidimensional set of broadly demographic features of collaborative teams, and then as best we could pair up teams using that profile. So try to get two teams together. They could be widely separate, in fact probably better to have them separate in location, but to try to pair them up as much as possible, and then give one the toolbox workshop and the other one doesn't get it, and then do that. You know, so that was the idea behind the experimental design there, and we're wide open to suggestions. We've been banging our head against this experimental design for a long time, and this is really a difficult thing to measure, because you know, our intervention is about 3 hours long. In the life of a collaborating team, I mean, that's just a drop in the bucket, right? I mean, and so it's really hard to know how to capture whatever type of impact that can have on a team. And this is one idea that NSF thought we probably should think some more about. So if you have any ideas, we're happy to. You know, we like to learn from folks with better ideas than us. Holly.
How did you choose these values or the statements that you gave?
Great question. The first, so there are three instruments. There are three toolboxes. There's a research toolbox, and then there's one that we've developed this past summer for climate science, translational climate science. One of the modules that you have on there is from the climate science toolbox, and then we've got one that we've developed with the Institute for Translational Health Science over at University of Washington that focuses on translational health science. So you have three different instruments. There's overlap between them, but the first one we developed in the context of that seminar, and we did it a couple of different ways. We sort of adopted a methodology that involved sort of starting, kind of going top down and bottom up and then meeting in the middle. The top-down part was driven by an attempt to use philosophy to conceptualize what a scientific research worldview might look like. So for instance, in that toolbox, there are 3 modules that we call the epistemology modules. And those are modules that focus on knowledge, and in particular on the research process. And there, they track 3 different parts of what we like to think of as the research trajectory. So what you bring to the table as a researcher, your motivation, how you operate when you're doing your research, your methodology, and how you determine when you have something interesting to say, confirmation. Right? So that's a sort of relatively elegant, somewhat top-down structure that maps the kind of research process. That framed half of it. And the other half was actually more bottom-up, where we spent a lot of time in the literature looking at what problems people have encountered when they've tried to engage in these projects. And then there were a number of problems, like problems having to do with the conflict of values, problems having to do with questions about whether you take the world to be reducible to just a collection of atomic parts, or whether there are aspects of the world that emerge, that are, whether the world's, in other words, a complex system, or it can be reduced to some more simple system. These things were topics of conversation and points of contention among researchers on collaborative teams. So those are where the contents of that one came from. These are a little bit more bottom-up in their development. We've worked with the Northwest Climate Science Center and with Sanford's REACH project on the climate science toolbox, and with ITHS on the health science toolbox. And there what we've done is our best effort with them to get on top of the literature that addresses collaboration within these translational efforts. But then we've also conducted we've developed surveys that we've distributed to practitioners who are engaged in these projects, and used those surveys to get their best sort of information about what the problems are. And then once we have a relatively well-articulated problem space, see what we can do through abstraction to try to pick out the key elements, right? The kind of the joints in the structure, try to identify what those are. These 2 modules come from very early versions of those toolboxes. We've just piloted them a couple of times each, and so there's a lot of room for improvement. But so our methodology, our processes has kind of changed a little bit over time, but we're still trying to do the top-down, bottom-up, meet in the middle as much as possible. Gazi.
I had to come for your sake.
Well, thank you.
You look unique in the universal environment. Look at him. I've never seen him in a suit before. But in any case, an attractive topic, so I had to come today. So I had to drag myself for your sake. So,
thank you.
About 8 years ago, remember I gave a seminar on the integration, on the
Yeah.
evolution of social sciences?
Right. Right.
Sounds a little bit similar to that, except you're approaching it from a philosophical perspective.
Uh-huh.
In your toolbox, I want to suggest to you that in the 2001, 2002, United Nations had been holding seminars and workshops on exactly these kind of topics.
Cool.
Now,
I'm not familiar with that work, but that's
I
great.
gave you all the references 8,
Yeah.
9 years ago. I'll send them to you.
Great.
Now. And trying to integrate various disciplines and the challenges. So 2 or 3 questions or comments that come to mind when you mentioned working across disciplines and professions. United Nations seminars also insist working across geographical boundaries.
Right.
On a given issue, there may be a Chinese philosopher, or a Chinese expert, or an Indian, or somebody in the Arab Islamic world, and Africa.
Right.
Integration means bringing all those perspectives
Sure,
too
yeah.
for common problems. As far as your challenges to communications, I don't know anywhere in this country, in the academia, do we have any degree program which require a PhD in common knowledge, or a PhD program or master's in interdisciplinary knowledge? Because the reason I say that, still we are wedded to specializations. We are wedded to territorial protections, kind of like trade barriers in economics. Mine is the best, and if you if you bring sociology to economics, you are contaminating economics.
Right, right.
So there are issues, all kind of issues such as those, I suppose you're addressing in your debates, but these other referenced are.
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, certainly we don't make any claims that this is novel. I mean, I really do believe that what it represents is an attempt by us to harness the power of philosophy to solve or at least address a problem in a particular space. And the problem that was motivated us initially was the problem that these students had. But then we saw that kind of approach might have a broader reach out into the research community and maybe beyond the research community. But in some ways, I don't think of it as a novel idea. I mean, the idea is just the idea of philosophical practice, I mean, which has been around for millennia. So, but now the question you asked about an emphasis on integration or on sort of across disciplines, that there are concerted efforts by universities and by funding agencies to change the culture of research, to change the culture of graduate education especially, in the direction of more integrated interdisciplinary efforts. So the iGroup project that led to the Toolbox approach is an example of a project under the Integrative Graduate Education and Research Traineeship Program, which has been a part of NSF for 15, 20 years, something like 15 years. And what they're attempting to do, what they do is they fund primarily PhD education programs that seek to integrate different disciplines and so seek to expose PhD students during the course of their graduate education to the challenges and the rewards that are associated with interdisciplinary activity. So, and that's just one example, but there are other funding agencies that are doing their level best to change the culture. There are universities that have been transformed with a view to creating a space within which interdisciplinary activity is featured. Arizona State is a really good example of this. Michael Crow came in from Columbia and basically just swept everything out and replaced it with, departments went away, colleges went away, replaced it with centers, and not everybody loves this, you can imagine, but the one of the consequences of this has been for him and for Arizona State a real growth in the development and funding of interdisciplinary projects. So there are concerted, focused efforts that on interdisciplinary and interprofessional activity of the kind that we're attending to. The UN kind, I mean, I think this, I actually am completely convinced, without reason. So I'm exposing it to one of my biases. I'm completely convinced that this is the sort of thing that could definitely work in the context of the UN. I mean, how well it would work, I don't know, but it's certainly the sort of thing that I mean, if anything is going to work, something like this has a shot.
Study about this thing, numerous papers.
Yeah.
I have a copy. It's in the library.
Great, thank you.
But another briefly, a final point here. When you say toolbox, to me it kind of feels we're coming full circle. If you go back many centuries, especially late medieval centuries, knowledge was holistic, comprehensive. Even scholars, St. Thomas Aquinas and so many others, they delved into everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the specialization of discipline is relatively recent, only the last couple of 100 years or so. All who have our little boxes.
Yeah.
And now we are trying to put the boxes together.
Right.
Pretty specific question about the toolbox. I thought it was
Sure.
interesting to use the expression "I don't know" as one of the options in contrast to "it
Right.
depends," because I wonder how many people really don't know, or people.
Well, this is, so we've gone round and round about that a little bit. So the options are 1 to 5, I don't know, and not applicable, right? So, and so you're suggesting that maybe we should replace that with it depends?
Well, only because I read all of these sentences, and that would be my response. And I'm wondering how that would actually further multidisciplinary conversations, though, because if your response to something depends on what's actually at stake,
Right.
this goes to some of the former comments, like, is it your, set of issues that's at stake? If so,
Yeah.
find that qualitative science is better than quantitative science.
Yeah, no, on the design of the instrument, I rely quite heavily and quite deferential to my social science collaborators. But there are definitely people who circle I don't know and mean it. And they don't circle it just because it comes closest to reflecting their epistemic state than anything else that's available to them. But for instance, we just ran, we piloted the translational health science toolbox over at University of Washington a couple of weeks ago. And we were working with groups that were heterogeneous. They had researchers, laboratory researchers, they had clinical researchers. They also had folks who were working with community groups. And so this wasn't really designed for the community groups folks. And some of them, when they engaged with some of these statements, really didn't know. I mean, they didn't it wasn't a part of their identity to think of themselves as researchers. And so they just didn't really know what to make of the statement. Now, it's funny you should mention about the it depends. I mean, one of the original motivations for introducing the Likert scale into the instrument in the first place was to get people off the fence. So we ran a couple workshops where that was like everybody's response. It's like, it depends. It's like, this is the most boring dialogue ever. What does it depend on, right? I mean, please, if everybody's on the fence, I mean, that's kind of an impressive sort of fact about the group and their balance. But still, I mean, it makes for a very, very uninteresting dialogue. So what we did was introduce the Likert scale in part so that at the very least, what might be generated is the appearance of disagreement. So if you put a 5 and I put a 1, then at least it might look up front that we disagree. Right? It looks like we disagree. And we might talk through that and realize that, oh no, we just interpreted it differently. In fact, we have the same view. But that's the kind of thing that would come out in the dialogue. But only, in our experience, only if there was some motivation for addressing the statement in the first place. Right? And that appearance of disagreement was what motivated that. Nancy?
I think Ghazi's statement about the United Nations was intriguing because many times the funders for programs for implementation of research that comes from academic settings, or the policymakers who will integrate those aspects that what is discovered through that translational research are making decisions based on perhaps heart thinking, perhaps beliefs rather than science-based knowledge. So I think this toolbox has some implications for policymakers wherein just by nature of having included this translational research, by the evidence saying, well, we're talking about global climate change, and we're talking, here are the economists weighing in with the climate scientists, with the,
right.
The geologists, whatever we're talking about. And I think that would be helpful to bridge the divide from policymakers I've talked to who call into question something that comes from an academic setting, simply, oh, it's theoretical, it's not real life.
Right.
I dispute that. I hope you know I disagree with that position. But
Right.
It seems to be commonly held, and I think it's detrimental to the outcome. So I think this is a marvelous opportunity for us to expand your toolbox use to other areas.
And one of the challenges in developing the instruments is figuring out what's the problem space? Like, what's the space within which these groups are collaborating? And where, because what you want to do is, as best you can, at least with respect to a certain class of problems, outline the comprehensively the assumptions they bring to bear on those problems. And that's at least the objective or a goal. But that has to be done. You have to balance a desire for comprehension with a desire for detail, right? Because the statements themselves have to be pretty detailed in order to motivate the kind of discussion we're interested in. And so there's a balancing act that you have to perform between wanting to cover the whole space, but also wanting to cover the whole space with a manageably small set of relatively specific statements. Now, one of the things that we've done with the climate science groups is focus on the science management interface. And we're management here, they're the group that we've been working with, especially interested in natural resource management. But one of the challenges that they are grappling with is the challenge of communicating with policymakers, right? I mean, local, municipal policymakers and state and even federal policymakers. And so they make a distinction, the folks at the Climate Science Center with whom we've been working make a distinction between natural resource managers, planners, policymakers, and so they see these different groups as having different sets of values and different priorities. And the instrument that we developed for them focuses primarily on the natural resource manager scientist interface. But we agree. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, the policymaking group is also needs to be involved in these conversations, in our view, and could profit, it seems to me, if the instrument's well designed, from the same kind of dialogue. I mean, I think this is exactly, I like to think of this work that we're doing as exactly the kind of thing that falls within the improving or the effective communication and engagement series that Janet and Mike Scott are running, you know, on when Rodney's talks aren't the talks in the series, it's Janet and Mike's panel presentations that focus on, is it improving society with science?
Communication and engagement.
Yeah, the communication engagement series, right? Again, the idea being pushing knowledge from the academy out into the world in a way that informs management, informs policy decisions. And I completely agree. I think that it's work we've not yet done, but it's work that is potentially available for our group or others who are interested in using philosophy this way.